Hi, good afternoon, folks. Sorry, I know I'm the last one. You're all probably super tired. It's been a long day. Sorry, it's just I'm the last one. Let's try to make it through this. Um, so, my name is Team Mothman. Today, what we're going to kind of go through is from the Department of No to a team of Let's Go. Essentially, what this is if you've been working in the security field or if you've had engaged with your security teams in your corporations, you more than likely have heard the term that there's the Department of No, where security kind of gets in the way. They slow me down. They build walls, and hopefully, what we can get through today is trying to shift away from that and get some takeaways to make some cultural changes that we think could be easy. I'm going to go through some examples of what I've done, what I've heard in the past, and some of the changes that I've done at the corporation I've worked at, and share something there. So first and foremost, who am I? My name is Team Mothman. Again, I have quite, I would say it's a different background, but it sounds like it's pretty normal for people that end up in security in the last dozen or so years. My degrees were in biology and healthcare informatics, so I had no idea what I wanted to do coming out of college. I went into college to become a vet. I came out of it not a vet. I got my first job in desktop support. So working on broken printers and installing things and pretty much a standard help desk type of role, which I'll get into a little bit more as well, helped me kind of have the insight into how the business works, which I think is critical to a great security practitioner. And then I moved into getting my master's in enterprise risk management at NYU, paid for by NYU, by working for NYU. So strongly recommend working for big companies that have those types of tie-ins. And then I pivoted to my senior analyst role in cyber threats, so I got a background in incident response. Did that for a few years. Pivoted to California, where I figured it was time to try the Silicon Valley idea, that whole allure where we think Silicon Valley is. Realized that I missed New York too much and came back. Actually, before I came back, I worked at PlayStation, or Fenwick and West for a little while, law firm. And then PlayStation for about 3.5 or so years. Worked as a staff analyst, so a little bit more on the GRC side, a little bit more on the operational side in the sense of approvals, denials, that kind of thing. And now today I am the manager of GRC at Cisco Meraki. And that kind of, what I'm going to go through today is a little bit of what I'm hoping to instill in some of my staff within Meraki, but that I've already experienced within PlayStation and NYU. So touching back on kind of why the problem exists and what the problem is that I'm discussing again. The problem we run into is that security has a perception of impeding progress, slowing down the business operations, and we fail to partner with internal stakeholders or business partners. So some feedback I've had or had heard over the years was, we don't understand the business. We don't know what the business does. Kind of security is always slowing us down. We're doing our own thing, and we're not aligned with them. So some of these items that I'm calling out here are kind of firsthand listed. First one is security goals and business goals are not aligned. Security sometimes comes down with an iron fist and just says, you need to do this thing. We need to roll out this EDR. We need to block this traffic. We need to install this thing because we said so. And the business is kind of like, for what? Why? What is the point here? And ultimately, one of the things one of my first CISOs taught me, and I credit this to him pretty often, is it's easy to do security, but it's hard to do security right. And then what that means is that you can turn everything off and block all traffic, any end, and your business will immediately collapse. So the business can survive without security. Security cannot exist without the business. And that's really critical for us to understand. The next item is conflicting priorities. Everything coming out of security may not always be priority number one for the business. So compliance objectives, things like that, may not be the top priority for the business. It's typically going to be developing a new title or a gadget or gizmo, whatever, and it may not be aligned with that. The next item was a lack of planning or urgent asks. There typically tends to be a part where security is not involved in discussions with the business to begin with. So it comes to security, something comes to security already on fire. And we find ourselves in that position all the time, whether it's incident response or operations, approvals, etc. And we need to kind of become a little better of a thought partner there. Then there's cultural issues that we run into there, security, engineering, business. I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, this is just the way it's always done, this is the way we've always done it, this is what we're used to. And that's pervasive in any industry and any organization. Then there's soured experiences leading to those walls being built. Somebody has worked with security at some point, and they got burned. And now they figure, I'm not going to deal with security until security reaches out to me, or until I end up on a radar, or until something happens. And so you want to build those bridges back. Strained relationships, same idea. You kind of done something, somebody's done something, or you've had an incident with somebody where maybe the soft skill kind of needs a little bit of work. Then there's the gap in knowledge, technology, processes. That's bidirectional. Some of our business partners may not understand what security functions are or what the tooling does. We're trying to put some agent on their systems, and they're just like, dude, what is this? What is this? What are you trying to do? This application is killing all my bandwidth. I can't develop on this. You blocked an agent, and I'm not able to run this. So having that understanding of security, and then also on their end is we may go to them, and I've done this in the past before. I'm guilty. I'll put my hands up for this. I've gone to the engineers and said, just do it this way, and you'll be fine. And they came back with, that's not how that technology works. That's not how the development works. So me doing that means that I can't do my job. So that misunderstanding, that kind of cross lines leads to an issue there. Then there's a lack of senior leadership support. Pretty self-explanatory. The business itself needs to be aligned with you in security. Senior leaders, if you're getting the senior leader of engineering to support you, then the engineers that are working below that leader are going to likely be aligned with you. But if there's a disconnect there, it's unlikely that someone's going to listen to you rather than their own boss. And then there's the adversarial approach. Same thing happens here. If there's finger pointing, or if you start throwing up graphs to senior leadership's meetings or their town halls, and you say, look at IT, they've already done this thing. Look at all the red graphs and these timelines. They're going to be like, dude, you made us look bad in front of our boss. You fought with me at home. I'm not listening to you anymore. And then these last two items, lack of recognition and lack of incentive. So if somebody does do well with you, please make sure that you call them out. You show them that they've done some well, that they've done something for you. They're a great partner for you. And the same thing, lack of incentive. Why should we work with you? What is the point of working with security? What do we benefit from here? And that's where it's important to kind of build those relationships. So I'm going to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the next two items. So two roles where I work, and this was a critical outcome. I worked at NYU Langone, and that statement under there, this is impacting patient care. Every organization has something where if an indicator or a user states this one phrase, immediately starts triggering alarm bells. So here it was, this is impacting patient care. So somebody submits a ticket or escalates something, and they say, this is impacting patient care, boom, all hands on deck, figure out what the problem is. I mentioned earlier that my background initially when I first started my career outside of college was desktop support. And although that's not directly within the cyber realm, what it did do was it helped improve the customer experience. So now I got to interact with the individuals that were actually the stakeholders at the organization. So I knew who was trying to figure out ways, who was putting Post-its on their laptops to put their passwords down, who was unplugging things because they couldn't get around it, who was just trying to hide an old computer under their desk until it's time to recycle it. So all these things I had that insight into. And then it also helped build a relationship with them to say, hey, what you're doing, I can help you get through that, help you, discard this before your 6-month review for your systems come about. And then there's also the separation of the way the business operates, researchers versus healthcare. So I work for Langone Health, but it wasn't just strictly a hospital, right? There's research being done there. There's cancer research. There's neurological research being done. So there's different constraints that both of these teams have. So on the healthcare side, they're saving lives. They have a very short timeline when it comes to responding to types of incidents or to responding to an outage of any sort, whether that means my keyboard's broken, my whatever is broken, all these things need to be done. Very short timeline and appetite for anything to be out there. So in that case, that's a scenario where we know this is impacting patient care really comes into play. And then there's research, tight budgets. So that's a scenario where you going in and saying, hey, you're using old equipment, you need to upgrade all your systems. They may not have that funding to do so. So you need to become a little bit more creative in understanding, how can I help this person? How can I maybe air gap some of these systems? Or how can I maybe provide them with something that one of my partners might have had, or this other organization is disposing of. And then the last point that I have there is improved incident response. So those first two items, I kind of had built a little bit of a relationship with the desktop support side. On the third part, there's improved incident response. So which users were incident prone? Which were the users that were likely going to be impacted by something because of their behavior, of the way that they work, of their types of interactions with other users. And then finally, there's that prior coworker relationship. The soft skills that I've used to develop over the time with my colleagues, with my partners, really helped in the incident response phase, because I can then call and say, hey, Jimmy, Dr. Smith on floor 5, when I used to work with you, he's having an issue. Is that something you can help kind of, grease the wheels on and help me get through? So those soft skills and those relationships really help, particularly when it comes to getting things done a little bit faster, not even just on the security side, but typically in anything, right? It's a lot about who you know and how good those relationships have been developed. And the next item I have here, right, is Sony PlayStation. So working at PlayStation was honestly a great time. I would say probably one of my top experiences. You'll also find me in the credits. That's a pretty cool thing for a bunch of titles. So one of the famous ones, it may not be this is impacting patient care, but this will delay our title release. So we have to release X-Men, we have to release Ghost of Tsushima, we have to release God of War, all by this date. And each of these items are critical because they have a dollar amount tied to them, right? There's several millions of dollars that are tied to developers, engineers, branding, marketing, etc., where coming in and just saying like, nah, you have to do it this other way, immediately has a tangible dollar amount that's measurable to say, you are literally wasting this much time over this week in order to roll out this problem. So a couple of things that I call out here too, right, is enterprise versus studios. How are these parent companies being done? How is that culture shift so critical? So there's a parent company, Sony, who has a lot more of kind of a mature or strictly governed protocol. So Sony has this governance plan, this way to handle it, these protocols that you need to go through to get something approved, implemented, rolled out, blessed, etc. And then there's the studios. The studios operate completely differently, slightly more autonomously, where they are the ones that have historically been the money makers, right? They actually generate several millions of dollars a year by creating titles. And they are kind of the relationship of the creatives. And creatives work a little bit differently compared to sort of your typical corporate enterprise. So working with them to understand, all right, well, who is your key players here? What types of systems do they need to use? That kind of thing. And that was the most critical thing that I needed to work with them was they're not using standard equipment. They're not using standard software. They're engaging a lot with kind of a very small, that's the last item I call here, I'm jumping around a little bit. They engage with very small, very niche firms in order to achieve their goals. So sharing highly sensitive data, in this case it would be, the title that they're working on for the last 5 years. They need to share the schematics for the character art, or what they call rigs, with these artists. And these artists are internationally known and very popular, but there's like a very small cohort of maybe like 10 artists that are really well known for making like in-game chairs. So if you're talking about like a little niche thing like that, where you need to share this amount of data with them that has such a critical difference, you kind of need to also be willing to communicate that risk to the business and say, you can share this with them in these guidelines, but you need to do it in a way where we can monitor it, securely transfer it, provide it in a certain way that's going to be acceptable with the business. And then there's a lot of acceptance that needs to be done there. Then there's, going back up to the planning cadences, some of the differences we ran into there is corporate side obviously ran on a little bit more structured sprints, right? Every 2 weeks we could do this. We can project how much time is spent on development. In 6 weeks we'll work on this. In 2 months we'll work on this thing. And on the development side for the titles and the games, you put yourself in a position of, no, I can only run this. I can run this now or in a year from now. So you need to be flexible in the conversations you have with your partners to understand what is their appetite, what is their workflow, and how can we start rolling it out. Operational differences, same thing, scalability of standards. Money comes into play again here. We may not have the ability to spend the amount of money that we're making because they have very tight budgets when it comes to development. So you need to be a little bit more creative in that same sense. And then there's the exception side too, right? Exceptions, again, organizations run into this pretty often and pretty frequently. What you run into in this case is a scenario where you are unable to meet the requirement that's set forth by the business, and you need to figure out a way to say, okay, this is accepted for this amount of time with this many mitigating controls or compensating controls, and have this in place, follow up again in 6 months, 3 months, whatever, and tell me the difference. So those exceptions really are critical to building that relationship with the team, because they'll understand, hey, I know I'm doing something wrong. I accept the risk associated with this because this is more important based on money or timing or resources, whatever. And I'll follow up with you again in this many months. Hopefully you get a good relationship with these partners where that exception is just an exception and not the standard or the rule. So I know that we're slightly coming up on time, but there's kind of my key takeaways here, what I want to build in terms of these relationships. Dale Carnegie has stated in the past, talk to someone, or has wrote in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Talk to someone about themselves and they'll listen for hours. And that's a really important statement, because if you start engaging with these business partners and you build that relationship with them where they're really proud to talk about, this is how I build games, this is how this is the research that I'm working on, this is the new healthcare thing that I'm doing as a doctor and then surgeons, etc., and you start showing an interest in that, you really build that relationship. So the first one is to get to know how the business operates. It's imperative that you as a security practitioner understand what you are protecting and how they are operating in a way, because that also gives you the insight into the way that they operate, and what they're doing introduces different levels of risk and introduces different levels of potential threats to your organization. So if you learn how the business operates, you can then become a little bit more nuanced in your offerings and your way that you support the business. The next item is explain the why behind security's asks and what's in it for them. It's really easy to just say, you need to do this, you need to roll out the TDR, because if you don't, then I'm going to write a ticket, you're going to get escalated, I'm going to go yell at your manager, the manager's going to come down and tell you to do it anyway. No one wants to hear that. But instead, if you say, we're rolling this out because we need to protect your data, because we've seen this happening in our environment, because we've seen this breach and we need to be able to recover from it, otherwise it's an outage on your part, and whatever. And that's actually something that we've done really well. When I was at PlayStation, we had a partnership program, like a liaison essentially program, where every set of our analysts was tied to a specific studio. So we became that one person that was tied to, for example, Sucker Punch, Insomniac, Naughty Dog, etc. And the individuals at those studios would then come to me and say, hey team, we're about to do this thing. What do we need to worry about? How do we need to engage with this? Or what should we do in the meantime? And having that understanding of, okay, we need to do this because we don't want you to share X schematics with Disney, for example, and accidentally have a breach of your title that you've been working on for 3 years to be out before it's released in 3 more years. The next item is, are there processes that security can be built in? And the first one is there passive monitoring versus gated approvals? We need to be honest with ourselves too. Security may not have the scalability to actually be directly involved in the approvals, reviews, etc. for all of our partners. So what we want to do is actually get to a place where we can say, all right, where do we need to be in there for logging, monitoring, investigations in the event that there's an incident? Or where do we need to actually be in a place where we say, okay, before this gets rolled out into production, somebody in security needs eyes on it. Maybe there's an architecture review board. Maybe there's a change management protocol that security needs to see at the table at, things like that. And then if not, develop them with your stakeholders. Nothing gives an organization a better sense of accomplishment than someone being involved in the process for something that was successful. So if your partners were involved in the development of a process with you, and that process ends up helping them become a little bit more efficient, they're going to feel some level of ownership there and be a lot more of a champion, which is touching on the next item too, which is to improve those relationships. Improve the relationships could be anything, right? Whether that means building a soft relationship with some of your partners, finding a common interest in them, in what they're interested in, or having the security, what we would define as friendlies or security allies and champions. These people that are embedded within the organization are really going to help you even with your own initiatives as well. because you're going to come in and say, hey, I need you guys to be involved in this discussion when it comes to rolling out EDR tool. We need your help in getting this approval or denial or whatever, and we need you to help with like incident response. And you'll say, hey, I know James in this team, and he and I are, we meet all the time. We're involved in these conversations. You become a common presence, and they're not building ways around you. And then finally, the last item is to be realistic. There are going to be scenarios, and don't take it personally, where security has a very strong opinion. You go and you tell your partners, hey, don't do this thing, and the business comes back and says, we're going to do this thing because we made the business decision. It leads to this many dollars. Sorry, but we're going to roll the dice, take the risk. But at the end of the day, that's going to be a business decision. And really all we can do is paint the picture and hope that they admire the artwork. So at this point, I think that is my last slide. I will stop here. Any questions? Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned how when you were working with certain third-party companies, having to do
exception
your governance process to select what you do develop, right? Would you say in the simplest terms for you guys, it was more like the Coca-Cola principle of one person has the syrup and doesn't know the rest of the
Yeah. Well, essentially it depends. Yeah, to some degree. So, for example, every vendor that we shared. I'll take like PlayStation for example. For every vendor that we shared any data with, shared, hosted, transmitted, whatever, they undergone a third-party vendor assessment. And so everybody had at least a baseline, and then if there's additional, depending on data classification, you would have a lot more stringent controls, et cetera, put in place. So there was always going to be least privilege access. There's always going to be business justification, and there's always going to be some level of risk acceptance because you need to be able to share. For example, if you're going to be building toys when your new video game that's not been announced yet needs to be released, you need to share this with your partners in order to develop those toys. So that's kind of what we do is limit it to who actually needs to be hands-on your content and limit the amount of data that needs to be involved in that sharing. So I remember I was talking about before, you have a very limited selection of artists that you can share like the chair schematics with. That's all they get, chair schematics. They don't know what title it's for. They don't know what due date it's for. They just know I need to make a chair that meets these schematics. So as much as possible as you can reduce the risk and reduce the exposure, you reduce that blast radius in the event of an outage or a breach. So, cool. Anything else? Cool. Well, thanks so much, everybody.